Hi, this is Usha. Welcome to Rathod Science classes. Today in this lecture, we are going to see current affairs of 8th October 2021. In this lecture, we are going to discuss 9 topics which are very much relevant to UPSC. So let us have a look over the topics we are going to discuss in this lecture. So first topic is about Tanzanian novelist wins Nobel. So here Tanzania. So novelist who belongs to this Tanzania got this Nobel Prize. So because of this this is the news, and you need to remember the name if you are preparing for especially state public service examination. And next topic is about genetic proof for domestication of sheep. So actually what happened? So how can we relate this topic? So in our ancient history, we have one topic that is IVC, Indus Valley Civilization. So in this Indus Valley Civilization, so if you have completed your static syllabus portion from this Indus Valley Civilization, you will come across one thing like, so we also went for domestication of animals during that period. So actually many scholars they says that so we didn't have this domestication of a sheep, but actually this sheep used to domesticate in West Asia, but due to migration they entered in India. So this is a thing which we believe till now, and now recent studies mainly says that yes, we have evidence of domestication of sheep during this IVC period. So this will be very important from our ancient history point of view. And recently this IVC is also seen in news. We are going to discuss that recent study as well. And next study, it is about IIT Madras finds Kaveri in distress. So they mainly found out pollution which mainly caused by pharmaceutical companies release into this river Kaveri. So this is important from our geography point of view, and even we can connect this article with our environment and ecology, which mainly comes under our GS paper 3. And next topic, it is about India and Nepal to conduct joint patrols over controlling of trans-border crime. As you all know, India which is sharing boundary with Nepal, right? So across this Indo-Nepal boundary, so we can see there will be some trans-border crime that can be seen. So here, recent meeting they mainly held regarding they are going to conduct some joint patrols mainly at this border to control this trans-border crime. So this will be important from international relations and even security, which comes under GS paper 3. And next two topics we are going to discuss about economy, that is World Bank retains India's financial year 2022 growth GDP forecast at 8.3%. It is about our growth forecast which is came up by World Bank. And next topic, it is about Lincoln survey, which mainly find out that 55% of professionals they are stressed, and we are going to see what are the reasons behind their stresses. So these two articles which are important from our economy point of view. And next topic, it is about malaria vaccine. So in yesterday's lecture we studied introduction regarding this malarial vaccine. Here WHO mainly considering this malarial vaccine. So here we are going to see each and every point which is important from our UPSC point of view regarding this malarial vaccine. And next one is role of PRIs in disaster resilience. So till now, if you are focusing on disaster, if any disaster had happened, so after the disaster, whenever we are going for reconstruction and as well as rehabilitation, that is post-disaster management, so we are not taking into account this community level. But here due to this COVID-19 pandemic, so it mainly showcased importance of this PRIs to control this pandemic. So in this context, we are also going to talk about this Yokohama strategy and what can be done to strengthen our PRIs. So this is very important from our disaster management from GS paper 3. And you can expect a question regarding this PRIs in disaster management in your GS paper 3, especially in your mains for sure, and it is a 100% question. And next topic, it is about AgriStack. We are going to talk about IDEA. Okay, so it is about technology development in agriculture. So now let us try to see first topic. Title says Tanzanian novelist wins Nobel. Okay, so it is about Tanzanian novelist mainly wins this Nobel Prize? So one important thing, so I will be giving you dimensions here. Okay, so first dimension, you can think about where is this Tanzania is present and which are the countries which are sharing boundary with Tanzania. So in this way you can think. And next one is which are the important rivers or deserts or any important geographical relief which is present in this Tanzania or not. So in these two ways you have to think about this topic, and you have to open your atlas and you have to see answers. You have to find answer for my question and let me know in comment box. So now let us try to see this topic. If you see context, it mainly says that Tanzanian novelist name here is Abdul Razak Gurnah. Okay, so he is this person, Abdul Razak Gurnah. He won this 2021 Nobel Prize in Literature. So we are having different fields, right? For example, we are having medicine, physics, chemistry, peace, and as well as we are having literature. So in these fields, Nobel Prize will be given, and Nobel Prize in the field of literature 2021. Who got this Nobel Prize? That is this person, Abdul Razak Gurnah. Okay, so why he got this Nobel Prize for literature? Especially for uncompromising and compassionate penetration into the effects of colonialism and the fate of refugees. So actually why this person mainly had writings about this colonialism effects and as well as fate of refugees. So he was born in 1948. Then what happened? So he was mainly used to live in one island. So from that island mainly colonized, and he entered England as a refugee. So because of this, whatever the writings he done with uncompromisingly and even compassionate manner, and he mainly focused on what are the effects of colonialism, because that person at that position, he saw everything. Okay, so because of this, he was mostly influenced by this colonialism, and he understand what will be the effects of this colonialism at the ground level, and what will be the fate of refugee. So his writings mainly based on effects of colonialism and as well as fate of refugee, as the person who also faced problems due to this colonialism, and as well as what will be the fate, what will be the situation of a refugee. He knows that the most, because he was also one refugee to England. So if you're talking about some important details, it mainly says that, so he is mainly based in Britain now. So Mr. Gurnah, he is the first African to win award since Zimbabwean Doris Lessing in 2007. In 2007, from Zimbabwe, Doris Lessing won this award. Okay, from then he is the first African writer to get this Nobel Prize, and he is the only second writer of color from sub-Saharan Africa after Nigeria's Wole Soyinka won in 1986. So from sub-Saharan Africa, he is the second person. And if you see in his 10 novels, he has consistently and with great compassion, he penetrated into the effects of colonialism in East Africa. And also he wrote his writings mainly based on the effects of the lives of uprooted and as well as migrating individuals. So his writing mainly focusing on this effects of colonialism and as well as the life of uprooted and as well as migrating individuals, that is refugees. So if you're talking about this Abdul Razak, he dedicated mainly to truth, and his aversion to simplification are striking. So these are some important characteristics of this writing. And if you're talking about Nobel Prize is mainly awarded by Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. So it will be awarded by Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, and he is not awarded and this Nobel Prize will be not awarded posthumously. That means after the death of the person, this will be not given. Okay, so whenever the person is alive itself, so this Nobel Prize will be awarded. So this important thing that you need to remember. And if you're talking about some facts regarding this Alfred Nobel, he was a Swedish inventor, engineer, businessman, and philanthropist. He held 355 patents. Okay, so these are some important facts regarding this Alfred Nobel that you need to remember. And now let us move on to next topic. Title says genetic proof for domestication of sheep. So recent study mainly found that there is some proof that we can say here sheep mainly domesticated since IVC, Indus Valley Civilization. So I will be giving you dimensions. So first one is you need to know what is this Indus Valley Civilization. Some facts regarding this IVC, some important features of IVC. And next one is recent study which mainly done and revealed that whatever the earthenware which mainly used in this IVC, they found lipid molecules. So lipid molecules are mainly belonging to some dairy products and even fat of animals, for example sheep, buffalo, etc. In this way we can understand the food habits of people of this IVC. Okay, so in this dimension you can think about this topic, and you have to revise which are the IVC sites which are present in which area, on the banks of which river, and who is the first person made to identify that thing. That means who excavated those IVC sites. So in this way you can expect prelims question from this IVC, and IVC is one of important and favorite topic of not only UPSC but even state public service examinations. So here you need to know perfectly regarding this IVC. So every year we can expect at least 2 questions from this IVC. If you see context, it mainly says that researchers they are from the Central University of Kerala. So researchers at this Central University of Kerala, they have found out domestication of sheep had taken place in Indian subcontinent, especially in Indus Valley Civilization, which is mainly about 6th or 7th century BC. Okay, 6th or 7th millennium BC. So here what is this context mainly says about? Context mainly says that Central University of Kerala, which had found that domestication of sheep had been take place in Indian subcontinent, that is seen especially in this IVC period, that is Indus Valley Civilization. If you see some details, it mainly says that, so this study mainly found that genetic evidence, there is genetic evidence that sheep had been domesticated in region, in contrast to general belief that they were domesticated in West Asia alone. So, and that they had arrived Indian subcontinent through migration. So here from many years there is some evidence, or some people, experts, they said that domestication of this sheep not done in India, it was mainly seen in West Asia alone, and due to migration they entered India. So this is the one important thing which mainly said, but now we got the genetic evidence that we can say now sheep domesticated in India. So even though India ranks second in terms of sheep population, and in India we can see about 44 well described species and as well as genetic diversity and even phylogeography that can be seen during this Indian sheep breeds, but we don't know properly understanding regarding the genetic sequence of this sheep. So if you see, this study mainly provided strong genetic evidence that Indian subcontinent was one of the domestication centers of lineage A sheep. Normally we are having 2 lineages, lineage A and lineage B. So here this study says that regarding this lineage A sheep, so we have the evidence that we had domestication centers for this lineage A sheep. Then what about this lineage B? We are going to see now. So if you are talking about the key findings of the study, it mainly says that when DNA sequences were compared with the other breeds across the world, it mainly found out that Indian sheep halotypes, they were unique and as well as highly diverse. So during this study, researchers mainly found that, so whenever they are going for this DNA sequences and they are comparing with these DNA sequences with other breeds across the world, in India they found they are very much unique and as well as they are highly diverse in India. And next one is, we can see even high genetic diversity and as well as statistical analysis mainly suggested that sheep was domesticated in our country. So further they went for this genetic diversity studies and statistical analysis, and finally they revealed that yes, in India we had this domestication of sheep in our country, and wild sheep O. Vignei Blandfordi in Mehergarh. Okay, so in Mehergarh, that is in Pakistan. So it is a potential progenitor, that means potential ancestor of our domestic sheep. So which is the domestic sheep ancestor? That is wild sheep O. Vignei Blandfordi, which is mainly seen in Mehergarh. So study also founded that introduction of sheep lineage B into Indian continent that had been done through this sea route. Actually here researchers mainly says that we are also having another lineage, that is lineage B, and this lineage B which entered into Indian subcontinent, and that is mainly happened to this sea route, but not from Mongolian plateau. So this is the study which mainly proposed by researchers in China. And this one is the South Indian brands except Mandya. So except Mandya, all other South Indian breeds, they are belonging to this lineage A. That means they are domesticated in India. And if you are talking about significance, what is the importance of this study? So if you see importance, it mainly says that study will be very useful, especially in understanding history of agriculture in Indus Valley civilization. So what is the history? So what are the food habits of these people? So we can understand to this study. So if you're talking about recent study which mainly done, it mainly says that so in pottery, okay, in pottery of this IVC, so they mainly found some lipid molecules mainly made up of meat of pigs, cattle, buffalo, sheep, goat, and as well as even some dairy products. Okay, of the domestic animals, cattle or buffalo, they are the most abundant animals that mainly seen during this IVC period. So now let us try to talk about what is this Indus Valley civilization, what is the geographical extent, and what is the importance of this site, or what are the important sites names. So if we are talking about time period, Indus Valley civilization was established around 3300 BC. And it flourished during 2600 to 1900 BC. So since 2600 to 1900 BC, so there was a flourish in this Indus Valley civilization. And later on it started declining around 1900 BC, and finally it disappeared around 1400 BC. So these are some important facts. And this IVC, Indus Valley civilization, is also called as Harappan civilization. Okay, why? Because Harappa, it was the first site which mainly excavated. Okay, so because of this, Indus Valley civilization is also called as Harappan civilization. And next, if you see the geographical extent, we can see this IVC mainly spread in Pakistan, Sindh, Balochistan, Rajasthan, Gujarat, and western parts of some UP. So if you're talking about extension of this, that is the place of this IVC civilization, that is from Sukta Jenda in west to Alamgirpur in UP, and if you see in east, that is Mandu in Jammu and Kashmir, and in north it is to Daimabad, and it is to south, it is from South Indus Valley, okay, sides. So this is about the extent of this geography of IVC. And if you are talking about some important sites of this IVC or Indus Valley civilization, they mainly include, first one is Lothal, Dholavira, Rangpur, and next one is Surtoda, and Banwali, Ropar, Mohenjo-daro, Chanudaro, and as well as Harappa. So if you see some important sites which are located in India, they include Kalibangan, Lothal, Dholavira, Rangpur, Surkotada, Banwala, and as well as Ropa. And if you see sites which are located in Pakistan, they mainly includes Harappa. Harappa is located on the banks of the river Ravi. Next one is Mohenjo-daro. Mohenjo-daro, which is located on the banks of river Indus in Sindh. And this one is Chanudaro, which is also located on the banks of river, that is Sindh. So these are some important things that you need to remember. And I hope it is very clear. Now let us try to see next topic. Title says IITM study finds Kaveri in distress. So here I will be giving you dimensions. You have to know about where is this Kaveri river originated, and in between which states this mainly flows, and if there is any important dams over this river, so where are those dams located, and whether it is a east flowing river or west flowing river, and even tributaries. So these tributaries you can divide them as right bank tributaries and as well as left bank tributaries. So these are some important dimensions that you need to remember. So why this IIT Madras studies about this river Kaveri? So as you all know, India is doing excel in pharmaceutical sector. So India is mainly exporting generic drugs to number of countries. So India has become a pharmaceutical hub. So what happened because of increasing of this pharmaceutical industries, whatever the waste products or effluents which are coming from this pharmaceutical industries, they are mainly released into this river water. So because of this, what happened, that is leading to pollution of this river water with this pharmaceutical substances. So if you see what will be the impact, so in this river there will be the biodiversity is present. For example, we are having normally in these rivers we are having dolphins, we are having fishes, and wide variety of biodiversity that is present in these rivers. So because of this pharmaceutical effluents which are released into these waters, that will also affect even humans. How? Because whenever these pharmaceutical products are eaten or taken or consumed by this biodiversity, that is for example fishes, and these fishes if you are consuming, then what happen? So there will be the bioaccumulation is happening. So these bioaccumulation which mainly transferred through this food chain. So in this way there will be long-term impact that is seen on health of humans and even biodiversity. So this is the thing which mainly said, and now let us try to see this topic in a very great detail. So this will be important from your environment and ecology and even geography point of view. If you see context, it mainly says that study mainly conducted by this IIT Madras. Okay, IIT Madras, they mainly found that there are some contaminants, they including even pharmaceutical active compounds. So what is this pharmaceutical active compounds? Active compounds, they are nothing but these are the compounds which are mainly responsible for pharmacological action. So for example, I will be giving you like if you are suffering with fever, so commonly you will take this paracetamol tablet. So if you see this paracetamol, that can be available in market in different brand names like Calpol, Dolo, etc. Either in Calpol, either in Dolo, you will be having this active medicament that is paracetamol. So this paracetamol has the ability to decrease our body temperature or to control body temperature. So if there is no paracetamol in this Dolo, then there will be no pharmacological action. So the product, the compound which is important or responsible for pharmaceutical action, that is called as active compound. Okay, so in this contaminants which are seen from this river Yamuna, so they are also having this active compounds and even some personal care products and plastics, flame retardants, heavy metals, pesticides. These are the compounds which are mainly polluting this river Kaveri. So this is about this study and this is some introduction. And now let us try to talk about some important details. If you see details, it mainly says that, so due to increasing of pollutants in river Kaveri, which mainly underscores the need to regularly monitor the river and its tributaries for pharmaceutical contamination. So because of increase in pollution in this river Kaveri, and not only in river Kaveri but also many rivers in India like Yamuna and even river Ganga, they are facing pollution. So recently CPCB also released a report regarding polluted river stretches in India. Okay, so if you see here, we need to regularly monitor these rivers regarding this pharmaceutical contamination. So especially contamination by this pharmaceutical, it is a very serious problem because India is the second largest pharmaceutical manufacturer. So here, because of this, the waste which is coming from this pharmaceutical industries, whenever they are releasing this into nearby rivers, that will lead to pollution. And these drug compounds, when we are released into water bodies, even in a very small amount as well, that can cause a huge harm even for human beings and as well as ecosystem in the long run. So I will be giving you one example personally. If any pharmaceutical company, let us take it is manufacturing antibiotics. So if any pharmaceutical company which is manufacturing antibiotics and the effluents from that company mainly released in nearby water stream, then what happened in the water also, we are having different microbiota is present, like bacteria, virus, algae, protozoa, so and so we are having different disease causing bacteria and even parasites that are present here. So whenever these disease causing bacteria which they are coming in contact with this active compounds of this antibiotics, means they will have capability to come up with resistance that will lead to increase the problem of antibiotic resistance as well. So this might be the one of the serious threat we can pose in near future. So this is also one cause of concern. So because of this, I can say this pharmaceutical contamination is very dangerous for even biodiversity and for environment and for human also. So in this context, what is the need? So if you see need, we need to go for upgrading of wastewater treatment systems. So we need to go for wastewater treatment system. That means, so whenever there is effluent that is mixing with rivers, we need to go for setting up of this wastewater treatment. So after treatment only and after ensuring that wastewater not containing any pollutants, then only that can be released into these rivers. And next one is, we need to access first of all what will be the long-term impact of contamination that is mainly done by this pharmaceutical compounds on human health and even ecosystem at large. And if you see the recent data which is released by CPCB, that is Central Pollution Control Board in 2018, which mainly identified about 351 polluted river stretches that are present in India. So you can imagine the extent of pollution that is seen in Indian rivers. So one thing I want to say is, whatever the water you are taking is not a pure water, right? So if you say about 351 rivers, not a small number here. So almost all the rivers which are present in India, they have been polluted. And CPCB study reveals that the discharge of untreated wastewater is the one of the main reason for this river pollution. So what is the main reason? So whenever we are going for releasing of this wastewater into these rivers without treating them, that is untreated water, that is leading to increasing of pollution in these river stretches. And if you are talking about this assessment of water quality for identification of polluted river stretches, which mainly found in 31 states and union territories. So in these 31 states and union territories, the water which is present in the river, that is not meeting the standards, quality standards. And next one is, if you see the concentration of polluted river stretches, so about 60% of polluted river water that is mainly seen in 8 states. They include Maharashtra, Assam, Madhya Pradesh, Kerala, Gujarat, Odisha, West Bengal and Karnataka. So in these 8 states, we can see about 60% of polluted river stretches are present. Here cause of concern here is Karnataka. Okay. And now let us try to see some facts regarding this river Kaveri. So this will be important from your prelims. So this river Kaveri is also known as Panni in Tamil. It is also known as Ganga of the South. Okay, it is also known as Ganga of the South, and it is the 4th largest river of southern India. And it is a sacred river of southern India, and this river mainly rises on Brahmagiri hills of Western Ghats in southwestern Karnataka state. So they mainly rises in Brahmagiri hills which are located in our Western Ghats. So you have to remember this point. And it mainly flows through Karnataka and as well as Tamil Nadu. And one important dam which mainly seen on this river is Mettur Dam, which is located in Tamil Nadu state. And if you see some important tributaries, they mainly include river Arkavati, river Hemavati, river Lakshman Tirtha, river Simsha, river Kabini and as well as river Harangi. So these are some important tributaries of this river Kaveri. So now let us try to see the map. So this is the map of South India. So here this blue color line, it is our river Kaveri, which mainly originated in Karnataka, that is in the Western Ghats, and here we have Mettur reservoir, Mettur dam in this Tamil Nadu, and this Kaveri which is also forming delta wherever it is joining with this Bay of Bengal. Okay, so this is about this topic, and now let us move on to next topic. Title says India Nepal to conduct joint patrols for controlling trans-border crime. So for controlling this trans-border crime, India Nepal to conduct joint patrols. So now let us try to see this topic. As you all know, India Nepal sharing boundary. Okay, so here whenever the country is sharing boundary with another country, so there we are having the border security forces. Okay, so in India we are having the CRPF. So now let us try to see why it is in news. If you see context, it mainly says that border guarding forces of India and Nepal, they will conduct joint patrolling along the border to control trans-border crimes. So those crimes mainly include smuggling of arms, human trafficking, and even there are some other areas of concern. They are going to deal by this SSB, that is Sashastra Seema Bal. Okay, so across this boundary between India and Nepal, we are going to conduct joint patrolling. So we are going to conduct this joint patrolling mainly to control smuggling of arms, human trafficking, and other areas of concern, etc. So if you see some details, it mainly says that Sashastra Seema Bal is a central armed police force, and here this SSB mainly secures India-Nepal border. And recently there is a meeting held. So this meeting deliberated on security scenario regarding this India-Nepal border, and finally in this meeting they decided to take further measures, especially to enhance cooperation and even coordination between India and Nepal border. Okay, so between this India and Nepal border, especially this border guarding forces of Nepal and India, they are going to enhance their cooperation as well as coordination. And next one is they also decided to establish a help desk. They tried to establish a help desk by both armed police force and as well as SSB at transit points of the border that would continue to facilitate the movement of citizens. Yes, actually across this border movements of the people that will be happen. So one thing we need to ensure here is there will be a proper movement of people between these two countries, especially at this border. And one more challenge here is they need to control this smuggling. Okay, so this is the important thing that you need to remember. And if you are talking about this CAPF, Central Armed Police Forces, so we are having 7 security forces in India. So they mainly comes under Ministry of Home Affairs. So those 7 security forces include Assam Rifles, Border Security Force, Central Industry Security Force, Central Reserve Police Force, Indo-Tibetan Border Police Force, National Security Guard, that is NSG, and Sashastra Seema Bal. So here I want to give you a small homework. So along which border, which armed police force is present? So let me know in comment box. So I want to say one thing, across the border between India and Bangladesh and India and Pakistan, we are having border security force, and India and China we are having Indo-Tibetan border force. And where are this SSB present? That is between India and Nepal, right? And where are these Assam Rifles are present, and where are this CISF mainly works? Okay, so let me know in comment box, don't forget about this. And now let us try to see some important facts regarding this SSB. So you have to know this. It will be important from your internal security point of view. So if you are talking about this Sashastra Seema Bal, it is a special service bureau. So this special service bureau, now it is Sashastra Seema Bal, was thus conceived in November 1962. We came up with this SSB in year November 1962, and mainly we came up with the creation of this SSB in year 1963. And next one is the important objective behind setting up of this SSB is mainly for achieving total security preparedness in remote border areas, and even we can go for performing of a stay behind role in the event of a war. Okay, so first one is we need to maintain total security preparedness of our country across our borders, and we need to perform a stay behind role. And if you are talking about this SSB, is now spread along international border across Uttarakhand, UP, Bihar, West Bengal, Sikkim, Assam and Arunachal Pradesh. Okay, now we can see this SSB forces mainly in Uttarakhand and UP, Bihar, West Bengal, Sikkim, Assam and Arunachal Pradesh. And their objective is mainly to safeguard the security of assigned borders of India, and they need to provide or they need to promote a sense of security among the people who are mainly living across this border areas or boundaries. And next one is they also need to prevent trans-border crimes, for example smuggling, illegal activities like drugs and as well as arms, ammunition, etc. And they need to prevent unauthorized entry or exit from territory of India. So from territory of India we need to mainly control exit and as well as exit or entry into the territory of India. And as well as we need to carry out some civic action programs in the area of responsibility. So we need to also carry out some civic action program, and the programs, any other duty which mainly assigned by central government, that is SSB, is mainly developed for law and order, counter-insurgency operations as well as election duty. So even if there are any other duty which is given by central government, they have to do that. So apart from this, their duty it is to maintain security, and they need to go for prevention of trans-border illegal activities, and they need to prevent unauthorized exit and as well as entry into Indian territory, and they need to carry out some civic programs, and as well as they need to also do the work which is assigned by central government regarding election duty or counter-insurgency operations, and to maintain law and order, etc. So this is gist of this topic. And now let us move on to next topic. It is about World Bank retains India financial year 2022 GDP forecast at 8.3. So it is talking about our GDP growth forecast by World Bank. So if you are talking about context, it mainly says that World Bank has retained its June forecast for India's gross domestic product to grow by 8.3 percentage. Here World Bank, WB, okay, here World Bank came up with this growth prospects of India, and it said that so India is going to grow by 8.3 percentage in current fiscal year. So why we are going to have this 8.3? Earlier it was downgraded because now there is increasing of public investments. Okay, now it is mainly increased because of increasing of public investment, and because of increasing of public investment there is also increase in demand in the market, and government also came up with different schemes to give support for people, for example production linked incentive schemes. So because of this scheme, that is mainly boosting our manufacturing. So because of boosting our manufacturing, that is leading to increase in the demand. Okay, so this is the first important thing. And second important thing which mainly said by World Bank here is, despite the ravages, that means despite the crisis which mainly caused by this COVID-19 wave, the economic impact of this COVID-19 pandemic, which is very much relatively very small in this year when we are comparing to that of 2020. And the next important point here is, it mainly said that by next 2 years, okay, by next 2 years, as the base effect mainly fades. So you need to understand what is the meaning of this base effect. So base effect mainly fades, the growth is expected to stabilize around 7%, which mainly aided by structural reforms to ease supply side constraints and as well as infrastructure investment. So what happened by over the next 2 years? Now we are going to see there is a less effect of this base. Okay, base effect will be decreased, and such that we are also going to increase our economic growth further. So what is this base effect? For example, let us take in 2020, 2019 and 2021. In 2019, I used to get 10 apples at the rupees 50. Let us take this example. For 1 apple, I used to pay 5 rupees. In 2020, what happened for 10 apples? Now, in 2020, I gave 100 rupees. That means 10 rupees per 1 apple because of some supply chain disruption, so and so. and in 2021 it is I am paying 110 rupees per 10 apples. That means 11 rupees per apple. So if you are comparing the inflation with 2019 to 2020, it is about, we can say earlier I used to pay 50% and now I used to pay 100%. That is almost double. That means we can see price which is almost doubled here. So if you are comparing 2020 to 2021, the price which is double, that is not much double, that is 1 rupee increase in the price. So if you are comparing inflation with this 2020 to 2021, there is 1 rupee inflation. But I am comparing the inflation with 2019 to 2021, it is about 51 rupees of inflation. So this is called as a base effect. So whenever the base effect which is mainly decreasing, then we can find there will be the growth that will be stabilized. So if you are talking about what is this base effect, base effect means this is the term which mainly used in inflation. Inflation means the general tendency of increasing the price of goods and the services in the market. That is called as inflation. So here this base effect mainly refers to impact of an increase in price level. When we are comparing with the previous inflation this year, we can see there is increasing of price. That is called as base effect. And now let us try to see next topic. Title says Lincoln survey finds 55% of professionals, they are stressed. So it is about stressed people. Okay, so this study you can write whenever you are writing answer regarding this COVID-19 impact on different sections of society. You can add about this. Recent Lincoln survey report also says 55% of professionals, they are facing stress. If you see context, it mainly says that a majority of 55% of employed professionals in India, they are mainly feeling stressing at work due to work-life imbalance and even insufficient incomes. They are not getting proper incomes because during this work from home, the most of these salaries they have been decreased. And next one is there is also very slow career progress that we can see. So these are some important findings by this Lincoln survey. So if you see some details, it mainly says that the survey, which was based on the responses of about 3,881 professionals. So the survey conducted from July to September, and finally they came up with this report. And this report mainly says that people they are mainly are adversely impacted with this mental and as well as health of working professionals. So here what happened, because of this COVID-19 imposed lockdown and as well as work from home, so there is increasing of pressure on the workers especially, and there are about we can say like 32% of people, they are mainly facing this crisis. If you see further more details, what are the primary reasons for this work stress? So for example, let us take my position. So if I have to work from home and if I have to sit before this laptop for 8 hours continuous or 10 hours continuously, so my kids will not allow that, right? So because of this, balancing my work and as well as personal work, it is very difficult in my home. If I go to office means my elderly parents, they used to take care of my children, right? So if I am in house means they won't stay with me and they will leave me with my children. So because of that, I can't manage my work, my office work with this personal work. So this is the first important reason. And about 34% of people, they said this thing. And next one is they are not making enough money. So due to this COVID-19 pandemic, many people, they are not getting proper income. So there is already decreasing of salaries that is seen across the country. And next one is there is a slower career advancement that is seen. So these are the three important strong reasons which mainly said in this study. So while nearly half of 47% employed professionals, they mainly prefer to end work at reasonable hours. But only we can say 36% of people, they are actually able to complete their work within their reasonable time. Okay, and one more thing is, even from my personal thing I studied, I observed here is, so many people who are doing work from home, they are sitting more than 12 to 13 hours. Even my friends, even my relatives, even my family members, they are sitting for more than 10 hours. Actually, they used to do work 8 hours in office So within 8 hours they are mainly concluding the work and they are returning back to their homes. But now if even they are sitting for more than 10 hours or 12 hours, the work efficiency is not seen. So this is gist of this topic, and I hope it is clear. Now let us try to see next topic. Title says killing the chills. So this article mainly talking about this malarial vaccine. So in yesterday's lecture we studied about malaria. So what is this malaria? This malaria, it is a mosquito-borne disease which mainly caused by Plasmodium, right? So now yesterday we already discussed about introduction regarding this malarial vaccine. So what is that we are not going to discuss again. So now let us try to see what is written in this topic. So if you see context, it mainly says that recently WHO, that is our World Health Organization, endorsed the first world's malarial vaccine. So we are mainly having some hope like we are going to decrease the severity of this malaria. So if you see details of this vaccine, so the vaccine name is RTSS or AS01. So this is the name of that vaccine, but the trade name here is Mosquirix. Okay, Mosquirix, it is a trade name, and this vaccine is an injectable vaccine. So we need to take injection of that vaccine, and later on it will mainly targets Plasmodium falciparum. So it is the most prevalent malaria strain which is seen in Africa. And here this vaccine mainly developed by drug maker, that is GlaxoSmithKline. And next one is the active substance which is seen in this vaccine. It is mainly, this vaccine is made up of proteins. For example, if you say this COVID-19 vaccine, in some vaccines we are having the spike proteins, right? So in the same way, in this malarial vaccine also we are having the proteins which are mainly seen on the surface of this Plasmodium falciparum parasites. So on this Plasmodium falciparum parasites we are having some proteins. So these surface proteins are mainly used for preparation of this vaccine of this malaria. And this vaccine mainly aims to trigger immune system, and it will mainly defend against the first stages of malaria. Okay, so here in malaria we are having two phases actually. First one is mosquito phase and second one is human phase. So it is mainly affecting this this phase which is after entering this Plasmodium Plasmodium that enters into human. So that phase mainly inhibited or altered by this vaccine. And one more interesting thing here is, so this vaccine which is also protective with this hepatitis B virus as well. And if you are talking about potency, so we saw there is effectiveness of 30%. And European Union drug regulator already approved this vaccine in 2015 itself. Actually clinical trials of phase 3 clinical trials had been completed in 2014 itself, and in 2015 it got approval from this European Union drug regulator. And if you are talking about challenges, we are having many challenges. So first one is, it is inconvenient. Actually this vaccine should be taken in 4 doses, that is in 4 injections within 18 months. That means for children within 2 years of time, we need to give this 4 doses of this vaccine. Okay, so whenever we are giving this 4 doses of this vaccine which is not convenient or which is not matching the routine vaccine schedules of children for different other diseases. So this is one important thing, it is inconvenient. And this one is partly effective. So recently here testing mainly done on more than 10,000 African children, that is from 2019 to 2014. So those children who already took 4 doses of this vaccine, but they found they are just 40% effective. So effectiveness is very low. And this one is not long lasting. So after taking these vaccines, antibodies will be developed in our body, but how long they will be active or how long they will be effective, we don't know that. And the next one is they develop resistance. So vaccine mainly reduced the occurrence of severe malaria by about 30%. The occurrence of severe anemia and as well as complication that often kills the children by about 60%. So what happened in this malaria, the RBC mainly affected. So even whenever we are having this anemia problem, that is less amount of this RBC or hemoglobin, then what happened, that will further increase the complications. And next important thing is we need to talk about burden of malaria in the global level and as well as in India. So in 2019, we estimated that 229 million cases of malaria that mainly recorded worldwide. And we can estimate the deaths of about 4,09,000 deaths that is seen every year. And children who are less than 5 years of age, they are most vulnerable and they are mainly affected by this malaria. Okay, and if you see in India in 2019, India estimated about 5.6 million cases of malaria. Okay, so it is according to data which is given by World Health Organization. And now let us try to see countries that eliminated malaria. So recently in 2021, one country eliminated this malaria. So in this way also you can get a question here in your prelims, that is El Salvador. Okay, so over last 2 decades, that means last 20 years, there are about 11 countries have been certified they eliminated this malaria. So those countries include, which are those malarial free countries? UAE in 2007, Morocco, Turkmenistan, Armenia, Sri Lanka, Kyrgyzstan, Paraguay, Uzbekistan, Algeria, Argentina and El Salvador, that is recently. So what is the step, what can be done? So what can be the steps that can be taken? So if you're talking about way forward, so here we need to take some next steps for WHO recommended malarial vaccine here. So we need to take some funding decisions from global health community, and we need to roll out this vaccines, especially in countries where there are high number of cases of this malaria, and we need to take a proper decision here. So we need to take, apart from this vaccine, we need to also take some measures like we can say distributing mosquito nets, mosquito repellents, and spraying of some insecticides in this water dumping areas and as well as dumping sites, etc. So these are some important things that you need to remember regarding this topic. Now let us try to see one of the most important article, that is stronger at the grassroots. So it is talking about grassroots democracy. So if I say this word grassroots democracy, one thing that will comes into your mind is PRIs, right? Panchayat Raj institutions. So I will highly recommend you to watch our Panchayat PRIs lectures, which I recorded in our polity lecture series by Lakshmikant. So please watch that lecture, and I discussed in detail what is this PRIs, everything. Okay, so if you watch that, then you will be getting some idea. Actually this PRIs and as well as this municipalities will be very important from your polity point of view, and this is one of favorite areas of UPSC as well. So now let us try to see this topic in detail. So first let us try to see introduction regarding this PRIs, that is Panchayat Raj institutions. So this Panchayat Raj institutions first adopted in Nagaur in Rajasthan on October 2nd, 1959. So on October 2nd, 1959, for the first time in India, we got Panchayat Raj institutions mainly adopted in Nagaur in Rajasthan. And if you see at present, we are having more than 2,60,000, more than 500 Panchayat Raj institutions. So this is the number. So 2,60,512 Panchayat Raj institutions, they are present in our country. And these Panchayat Raj institutions mainly represent about more than 31 lakh elected members across country. And this system of local governance, here it is very, very strong, and it is very important because here this will allow for participative democracy. So you have to write this. So this will be helpful for our participative democracy, means people mainly participate here. in especially democracy, in especially decision making process. So it is one of the backbone of our democracy. So normally here PRIs or our grassroots level democracy, but many people, many experts says that this PRIs are rootless grass. So let me know reasons why these PRIs are rootless grass. In comment box, I discussed this topic in detail in our Panchayat Raj institutions in our polity lecture series. And if you are talking about a bottom up approach, unlike the other disasters, for example, if you see volcanoes, earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, etc., so we are having number of disasters that we are vulnerable to. So in these disasters, here we are mainly keeping this community aside. So we are mainly giving much role for National Disaster Management Authority, State Disaster Management Authority, National Disaster Management Force and funds. So there are many institutions and organizations are present. So we are giving much priority for those when we are coming with the disasters like earthquakes, volcanoes, and as well as floods, tsunamis, earthquakes, etc. But here in this COVID-19 pandemic, we saw this PRIs, Panchayat Raj institutions, they played an important role. They played a very remarkable role. So they helped mainly to reduce the risk, and they responded swiftly, and thus they helped people mainly to recover from this COVID-19 pandemic. And these PRIs, Panchayat Raj institutions, they provide essential leadership in this tough times, and they also performed both regulatory and as well as welfare functions. So this is one of the important thing we found. Now these Panchayat Raj institutions are very much relevant now. And for example, here during this national-wide lockdowns, these PRS mainly set up some containment zones, and they arranged proper transportation facilities, and they identified buildings that to be kept for especially containment people or quarantining of people, and they also focused on the provisions of the food for incoming migrants people, and also they played an important role mainly to provide some job opportunities under this MGNREGA for this migrant people, etc. So they are also very much helpful. They also focused on proper implementation of this MGNREGA scheme and National Rural Livelihood Mission. They quicked a pace of recovery, and these are the schemes that mainly ensured some income and as well as livelihood support for this vulnerable people, especially migrants. So we also saw many articles, and we also discussed number of times regarding there is increase in the demand for this MGNREGA. So 100 days of works which had been very much yearly completed. So whatever the works they are sanctioned for that year already completed just in 1 month or 1.5 months. We already discussed all these topics, right? And if you're talking about Gram Sabha, so Gram Sabha acts as a sounding board for diverse ideas and as well as opinions. So if you're talking about PRIs, there are 3 levels of PRIs. We are having a district level, we are having a block level, and we are having it local level, right? So we are having Gram Sabha at a basic level, okay? We are having this Gram Sabhas at a basic level. So who are these Gram Sabhas? Gram Sabha mainly includes the people who have the age, who attain the age of more than 21 years. That means people who are having or who attain this right to vote. So these people, they are part of this Gram Sabhas. So because of this Gram Sabhas, they are sounding board for diverse ideas and as well as opinions. And these Gram Sabhas, they will provide a platform to build consensus, and as well as they will help to take a proper decision. People will come together and they will gather together, and they will discuss their opinions, they will discuss their problems, and they will come up with the proper solutions. So in this way, we can enhance participatory democracy. And here these Gram Sabhas, they organized community-based surveillance system involving village elders, youth, and even self-help groups. And they come up with a very strict vigilance in quarantine centers, and even they monitor the symptoms of household peoples. And if I'm talking about building capacity, so if you're focusing on this Yokohama strategy, which is regarding disaster management and disaster resilience. So this Yokohama strategy during this international decade for natural disaster reduction, which came up in 1994. So this Yokohama declaration, which mainly focused on we need to focus, or we need to go for prevention, mitigation, preparedness of any disaster that can be done whenever there is effective participation of communities. So in this respect, there are certain initiatives that can be taken to build our PRIs into more strong institutions. So if we want to strengthen our PRIs, that is Panchayat Raj institutions, so one important thing that is very much crucial here is we need to focus on disaster management chapters. So we need to include this disaster management chapters in our Panchayat Raj Act. So whenever we are making this disaster management chapters included in this Panchayat Raj Act, then this will be very much helpful to make disaster planning, and as well as spending some part of Panchayat Raj developmental plans, and this will become the part of even local level committees and as well as communities, and they can plan for this proper effective disaster resilience. And this will be also very much helpful to ensure citizen centric planning and as well as planning of resources. Again, second important thing that we can do here is we can conduct local specific training programs. For example, so and so area which we is present in, especially let us take earthquake zone 5, means in this area we need to make aware about the people regarding earthquakes. So what are the steps that can be done? So how can they decrease the impact of these earthquakes, and what are the things that can be done during the earthquake and after the event and as well as before the event. So in this way we can go for local specific training. So for example, if there is any area which is mainly located on banks of any river, or if it is a low-lying area which will be affected by floods, means so in that area we can encourage people mainly to know about what will be the effects of floods and what are the causes of the floods and how can we decrease the impact of floods and how can we do some preparedness measures like removing of any waste which is present or dredging process. So in this way we can educate the people. And next important thing is, so community is usually the first responder in the case of disaster. So community based disaster management plans, that will very much help. So even if NDRF which comes there, or even if state disaster management force which is coming there, so the first people who are mainly responding to that disaster will be the community. So why can't we go for this community based disaster management plans? So we can also improve that, and this will 100% works. And moreover, we need to focus on especially finances. So here we need to ensure there is a proper finances for this PRIs. So this is gist of this topic. And now let us try to see next topic. It is about AgriStack, IDEA. So IDEA, which is nothing but India Digital Ecosystem for Agriculture. So it is India's digital ecosystem for agriculture. We are going to talk about it. Actually, this is not a new one. In June 2021, government came up with the proposal of this AgriStack and came up with MOU. So we are going to discuss this now. So before seeing this article, I want to make a small announcement on this platform. If you want to clear UPSC 2022, we came up with one excellent, highly beneficial and as well as highly economical course. That is current affairs package along with mains answer writing practice. So how this course will be useful to clear this UPSC 2022. So one thing I want to say is, before entering to your examination hall, you need to know at least 1.5 years current affairs. And this is right time to join this course to cover this 1.5 years current affairs in a comprehensive manner. And here we are mainly focusing on mains answer writing practice. So mains answer writing practice is very important to clear, especially your mains. Without proper answer writing skills, you can't clear your UPSC mains. So here in this course, you are going to write more than 300 questions, 300 answers and more than 50 essays. So in this way, here this course which is mainly focused on your improving your answer writing skills. And this one is, if you join this course, we are also provide you prelims questions. There is prelims based test every week that is based on current affairs. So in this way, this course which is designed as per demand of UPSC. So finally, I want to say one thing. Please don't take this course as a choice. Try to join this course as soon as possible and achieve your dream of clearing UPSC. So details of this course is given in description box. So please visit that once. And if you want to talk to me directly, you can call to this number 8074765513. Please make a note of this number. And now let's come back and let us see why it is in news. So recently, our Ministry of Agriculture signed MOU, Memorandum of Understanding with Microsoft. So our Ministry of Agriculture signed Memorandum of Understanding with Microsoft. For what? Mainly to run a pilot program for 100 villages. So run a program for 100 villages in especially 6 states. So they want to come up with a unified farmer service interface. They want to come up with a platform. So because of this, Ministry of Agriculture signed MOU with Microsoft to come up with a pilot process to create unified farmer service interface. And they are mainly using cloud computing services to come up with this unified farmer service interface. And this is called as AgriStack. So what is this AgriStack? So AgriStack means it is a collection of technology based interventions in agriculture. So here you can get a prelims question like recently AgriStack is in news. It is related to. And one more question is recently AgriStack is in news, which is an initiative of Ministry of Agriculture and along with which like Google, Microsoft, etc. And answer here is Microsoft. So if you're talking about this AgriStack, now let us see some basics regarding this AgriStack. AgriStack is nothing but simply I can say it is a collection of technologies and digital databases, and here they mainly focus on farmers and as well as agriculture sector. So they are coming up with a unified platform and they are using this cloud computing services here, and it is like a digital database. They can store the information, and this information mainly based on the farmers and as well as agriculture sector. So this AgriStack that will create a unified platform for farmers, and this unified platform that will provide end-to-end services. Okay, so in this way we can go for digitalizing of agriculture data in India. So this is the aim. Important aim is to provide a broader push for digitalization of India's data in farmers, in farm. Okay, so if you see here this important step, that is AgriStack of India, which is mainly along with our National Land Records Modernization Program. It is in lines with of our National Land Records Modernization Program. So under this Land Records Modernization Program, so each farmer they will get a unique digital ID. Okay, unique digital ID, that is called as farmer's ID. And this farmer's ID will contain personal information of that farmer and also information of land which is mainly holded by that farmer, and even there will be details regarding production as well as financial details. Production details means how much amount of food grains they are mainly produced in that so and so land. So what are the different types of crops they went for example rice, groundnut, etc. And financial details like whether that farmer got any agriculture loan or any loan, cropping loan from bank or not. So they will be also including even some financial details regarding that farmer. So each ID will be linked to individual's Aadhaar number. Okay, so this is about this AgriStack. And now let us try to see why we need this type of digital platform or interface. So at present, if you see across our country, we are having small and marginal farmers. So whenever we are having the small and marginal farmers, so they will be having limited access for advanced technology. They can go for getting of harvesters. They cannot go and get tractors, ploughers, etc., which can be used in agriculture, that will be helpful for increasing of productivity. So because of limited access to advanced technologies for farmer credit, they can help to improve the output and fetch better prices. We need to go for this digitalization, then we can easily get the data such that government can also provide some technical support for these farmers. And next one is this newly proposed this digital farming technologies and services, which mainly under the programs includes sensors to monitor cattle, to monitor drones, and even that will help to analyze soil and apply pesticides. That will be significantly improve the farm yields. So many farmers, they will not go for proper maintaining of their crops. So because of this, whenever there is anything which is happening, that will lead to loss to farmers. So because of this, it will be helpful even for monitoring of cattle. So many times what happened, many a times So if there is any farm is there, so nearby cattle that will coming and grazing in that fields. So because of this, that will lead to loss to farmers. So this is the thing I personally saw. Okay. And next one is we can use drones, especially for spraying of pesticides, and even analyze the soil condition, soil health, etc. So whenever we are going for proper management of our soil, proper management of our crop, that means whenever we are giving timely fertilizers, timely pesticides, then that will help to increase the yield of crop. That will be helpful for increasing of income of farmers. So doubling of farmers income, it is also one of the important aim of our present government. And if you see benefits when we are going with this, so it will be very much helpful for getting the information. So if there is any inadequate access to credit and information, and even pest infestation, crop wastage, proper pricing discovery, so we are having this proper interface such that we can address these problems here. And it will be also very much helpful for even fuel innovations and as well as breed investment, etc. Okay, it will be helpful for growing of resilient crops. And if you're talking about concerns, there are many concerns. So in India, there is no proper data protection legislation. So whenever we are coming up with these IDs and whenever we are registering the personal information of that farmers, then it will leads to threat to privacy or violation of right to privacy. And this one is commercialization. So whenever we are going for this agri stock, it will imply the commercialization of agriculture. Okay. So even here we are entering into digital as well as private sphere of farmers. So even that will leads to commercialization of agriculture. And there is absence of dispute settlement. So whenever there is this type of this digital interface, in this MOU they did not come about what will be about this dispute settlement. So because of this, what happened? There is no proper dispute settlement mechanism that is seen in this MOU. Actually, historically, if you are talking about evidences regarding the land disputes, they are continuing since some years. And next one is privacy and exclusion errors. So whenever we are giving some farmer's ID and we are linking with the Aadhaar number, that will leads to some violation of privacy of that farmers. And even what happened, if there is no Aadhaar card, means they will be excluded, and even it will be only given for people who hold the land, but most of the tenant farmers, they are mainly excluded here. So these are some important challenges. So this is about this topic in a very great detail. I hope it is very much clear. So by this we are concluding today. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Please subscribe to my channel and don't forget to like, share and comment my videos. And don't forget to enroll to this current affairs package. And the last date for registration is 10th October. And one more thing is, for the PDF of this lecture, you can join the Telegram channel. Link is given in description box. Thank you so much.